Coming up on this episode, the World Cup continues, but not for Warrior guard Lester Quinones, whose Dominican Republic were eliminated at the hands of Serbia in the last 12 hours. So, what do we make of the 22-year-old guard's performance at this tournament? Plus a stunning loss for Team USA, but one that could end up being a positive for Steve Kerr should he and his team get it right across the remainder of the World Cup. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. As I said there in the intro, the World Cup continues now going into the knockout stages. A little bit less so for me with the Australian Boomers being eliminated in the second round grouping there. The same can be said for Warrior guard Lester Quinones and his team, the Dominican Republic, who entered the second group stage with a 3-0 record, but unfortunately lost both their games, firstly to Puerto Rico, and then a heavy defeat to Serbia in the last 12 hours, going down 112-79 there. Look, after a really disappointing start to the tournament for Lester Quinones, his last couple of games were a major improvement on what we had seen. Still would be classified as a disappointing tournament, though, for him, especially given what we'd seen previously in Summer League for the Warriors and in the G League last season. So, again, his best game against Puerto Rico came on Friday. 13 points, 3 rebounds, was a plus 13 on the floor, which was a team high. Shot an efficient 5 for 9 from the field, 2 for 4 from 3-point range. But unfortunately, it wasn't all positives because he actually fouled out of that game with, I think, just over 5 minutes remaining. And he probably, given how he was playing, he probably would have closed for the Dominicans in that game. And it could have turned out to be a different result with how he was playing. As I said, plus 13, biggest plus minus on the team in that game. And after having a lead in the fourth quarter, the Dominicans got overrun there by Puerto Rico, which was really the critical loss for them because they would have probably been able to go through had they won that game, finished with a 4-1 record. The one against Serbia here in their final game was always going to be a tougher challenge with the kind of talent they've got at their disposal. And after a pretty poor first quarter, they were never really in the contest. In fact, it was only the fourth quarter where they were able to have some semblance of competitiveness. Really, they trailed by 34, I think, at the end of the third quarter. So a blowout one here. Quinones, 11 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, but just 4 for 14 shooting, 1 for 6 from 3-point range. So how do we evaluate his tournament? The numbers don't look very good. Let's put it that way. 7 points, 2.2 rebounds, 0.4 assists per game, 27% shooting from the floor, and 15% from 3-point range, and also recorded 1.6 turnovers per game as well. So he obviously got benched in that second game, only played 19 seconds in the second game in the first group stage, and then in the third game he came off the bench, and in the fourth game he came off the bench and he actually got thrust back into the starting lineup here for Game 5 against Serbia. But as I said, the performance there wasn't ideal from his own personal perspective, and obviously a 33-point defeat. It was never a chance, unfortunately, for the Dominicans to advance through to the quarterfinals. But it does ask the question, I guess, was this just an off 5-game span for Lester Quinones, or as we look at these things from a Warrior perspective, is there a greater cause for concern moving forward? And I think that it's really important to state that this is primarily an off 5-game span, like him shooting the ball at 27% from the floor and 15% from 3-point range. I think that is just an off 5-game span. I don't think that for him, the major strides that he's taken over the last 12 months from where he going undrafted to where he started in the G League to going to a level where he was eventually named the G League's most improved player for last season. And then what he was able to do in the Summer League, averaging over 21 points per game. Yes, the shooting numbers weren't great there either, but he did have to take a heavy workload for the Warriors in Summer League. So I think when you look at those two things and the kind of strides that he's taken in the last 12 months, I think it's unfair. It would be completely unfair just to discard what he's done in the last 12 months based on one disappointing tournament that we've seen here in the World Cup. However, what I will say is it does pose a question of how well he can play in a lesser role, because what we saw in this World Cup was completely different to what we'd seen with the Warriors in the G League program in Santa Cruz and in Las Vegas in Summer League as well, where in those two, in that kind of setup, Lester Quinones is probably the main guy, or one of the main guys kind of thing. And he doesn't have to play next to all-star level talent around him. Now, for a lot of players, that can be a good thing. You can play off the all-star level talent. You get better looks, which can increase your field goal percentages. I think that might be the case for Brandon Pajemski, who obviously struggled a little bit in Summer League with his shooting numbers. I do think that coming into the Warrior system, playing against experienced NBA talent, your Steph Currys, your Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, whoever, I do think that Brandon Pajemski's shooting numbers will actually be better at NBA level than what they were in Summer League. But it can go the other way as well, where your numbers can be amplified by the fact you have got a greater role against, in a lesser team against lesser opposition. And clearly coming into this tournament with, for the Dominican Republic, their best player being, an all-star level player in Karl-Anthony Towns, I do think that there was a little bit of an issue there of Lester Quinones going from being the main guy on basically every team he's played for, the Warriors, in the last 6 to 12 months, to going into a team where he wasn't the main banana anymore and he had to play off Cat a little bit. And that can be hard. That can be a hard adjustment for some players. And that, as I said before, it doesn't necessarily translate to better shooting numbers. You could think, well, he's playing against Cat. Cat will get double team. Maybe he'll get some open looks on the perimeter. He can knock them down. Maybe he can be a 40% three-point shooter in this tournament. Well, that just wasn't the case, unfortunately, as much as we would have liked it to be. And of course, we're looking at this from a Warrior perspective going into next season. He's going to be a two-way contracted player. But with the age of Steph Curry and Chris Paul, 35 and 38 respectively, he's going to get some looks here to play decent minutes. And I do wonder how that's going to pan out playing alongside the likes of Steph and or CP. I guess if one of those two guys is out on a nightly basis, then potentially Lester gets an opportunity some nights. So how is he going to go playing alongside those guys, playing alongside a Klay Thompson, playing alongside a Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins, guys that he's really going to be, out of a five-man unit, he's going to be the fifth player on the floor, really. So it does this tournament has posed the question in that regard, because he's not going to be able to go into the Warrior setup and Steve Kerr give him the ball and able to do whatever he wants, like he's been able to do in the G League with Santa Cruz and with the Warriors in Summer League, where, as I say, he was the main guy, right? He could take on most of the offensive workload. So the other thing for me here with Quinones is that there's been the comparisons to Jordan Poole, right? With the jump shot, with the kind of shot making, the kind of ability to pull up from deep, but also have enough handles and speed to get to the rim and blow by defenders if need be. So there's been the play style. There's been comparisons to Jordan Poole, which I think is unfair. Like you can see it, but I think it's completely unfair to compare a guy who's got a two-way contract to a guy who is now entering his fifth year in the league and will be a $120+ million player, rightfully or wrongfully. Jordan Poole is a $120+ million player now. And so to compare, and we're not setting expectations for Lester Quinones that he has to be get to a Jordan Poole level, but even just to make the comparison, I think is a little unfair on where both those players are at in their careers. However, in saying all that, I think there is one issue here that kind of overlaps between the two players. And the biggest issue for Jordan Poole last season was when the shot isn't falling, how is he impacting games in a positive manner? And I think that's always, when we're evaluating and we're valuing NBA players here, I think that's a really important question for scoring guards who can look fantastic, can be really impressive, can be exciting, can get to the rim, can take tough step back threes, whatever else. All looks great when it's up and going. When it's not, how are they actually impacting winning in a positive manner rather than actually impacting losing because they're having 1 for 10 shooting nights and nothing else is really going on for them? And so that was the issue for Jordan Poole last season. That's the issue for Jordan Poole in the playoffs, and why he became near on unplayable for Steve Kerr is because his shot wasn't falling. He had really no confidence whatsoever. And all of a sudden, you get into a point where, okay, this guy, he's not really doing much playmaking. He's not really making others better. His defense is horrific. And so we just can't play this guy in big moments. And Lester Quinones is a long way away from playing playoff minutes, but this is the kind of thing where you got to project forward to, because he's going to want to become that player in the future. And if he does get to that point, how does he earn meaningful minutes, even if the shot isn't falling? And, the shooting numbers are one thing here, 27% from the field, 15% from deep. That's one thing. Almost the more concerning thing for me is 0.4 assists and 1.6 turnovers. That's a horrific assist to turnover ratio. It really is. And not even that, but just the 0.4 assists. Like, what are we doing here now? Again, you can look at it and say, well, his workload offensively, the ability to put the ball in his hands more would have been nice, but still, 0.4 assists, I think, is something that stands out to me, not just the shooting numbers, that, hey, we really should have seen something more here from a playmaking perspective. And I think that's an element that's really going to have to grow his game, even if he's not a primary point guard. Like, we're seeing this guy as a shooting guard first and foremost. However, the ball is going to be put in his hands a little bit here. And I think it's important to develop that side of his game and not to have that kind of horrific assist to turnover differential, which we know Steve Kerr is going to be really big on next season. If Quinones gets his opportunity, comes in and has, in the first 4 minutes, has 2 turnovers and doesn't make a field goal or doesn't have an assist, then he's going to be yanked. Like, he's not going to get big opportunities if he's going to turn the ball over at that kind of rate compared to his assist numbers. So that was a kind of disappointing factor for me. And again, you've got to put the opportunity asterisk next to it by saying that, hey, he just didn't have the ball in his hands as much as what he has done with the Warriors in Summer League and before that with Santa Cruz in the G League. But still, I think it's pretty disappointing, and it has to be said, it was a disappointing World Cup campaign for Lester Quinones. I don't think we can try and sugarcoat that in any way. That's just what it is. But that doesn't mean that he can't go forward, get even better, have a strong training camp, have strong preseason outings. He's got an opportunity here to potentially can have his 2-way contract converted into a main roster spot, whether that's even before the season starts with that vacant 14th roster spot, or if he comes in and kind of does what Anthony Lamb did last season, where he actually has some impact here and there. And then, of course, they're going to have that 15th roster spot available potentially to use, around the All-Star break or just after the All-Star break, something like that. So I think it's clearly going to be an important season for him. It's an important season for any 2-way contracted player, because that's just where you're at in your NBA career. You're on kind of the precipice of either being in or out of the league. But as I said, I do think that we shouldn't just discard the kind of growth and strides he's taken in the last 12 months on the basis of one poor 5-game tournament here for the Dominican Republic in a completely different setup. The international game is completely different to the NBA, and for Lester Quinones, this is his first really major international tournament for the Dominican Republic. And so I think he's only going to be better for the experience, and hopefully he can use it as a motivating factor moving forward. As I said, we go into training camp here with the Warriors, where he's got a real opportunity to push his case for minutes next season and potentially for more than a 2-way contract as well. So in other results in the final game of the second round, the United States suffered a shock defeat to Lithuania 110-104. what a start for Lithuania. They began the game 6 for 6 from three-point range in the first quarter, opened up a 31-12 advantage, then knocked down the first three triples of the second quarter too. So they started 9 for 9 in the game from three-point range, which Steve Kerr described afterwards as a real punch in the mouth. And he couldn't have been more glowing of the Lithuanians' performance. Really, in credit to him and Team USA, they battled back, had a really strong 28-17 third quarter that drew them within 6 with 10 minutes to play. But then the Lithuanians, again, credit to them, they steadied and were able to pull off the upset victory there. It does make me wonder about the psychology of sport, and I do think that this, from an American perspective, can actually be a positive moving forward. Yes, they finished second of their second round grouping now behind Lithuania, who are now 5 for 5 from in the tournament. But I do think it could actually be a positive. They now face Italy on Tuesday rather than Serbia, and I'd almost rather play Italy, to be fair. So I'm not sure it's a complete disaster for the Americans, and I do believe that this could be the kind of wake-up call that they needed in a game that meant a little bit but not too much kind of thing. You'd rather have this loss now than obviously in the do-or-die stages to come, quarterfinal, semi-final, final, as we move forward here. So it does kind of paint an interesting picture of, the psychology of sport and how locked in, I guess, Team USA were for this game, knowing they'd already qualified for the quarterfinals to come. So I look at this, and I know from a recent sporting perspective, I'll just give it a bit of an example here of, I guess, the psychology of sport when there's not everything to play for kind of thing. And, for Americans listening to this, you're not necessarily going to get it too much because I'll be talking about AFL, but it does offer kind of a perspective here that I think is still transferable across every sport in the world, even beyond the professional level. So about a month ago, or whatnot here, it was the fourth last game of the AFL we call it home and away season, but it is to the NBA, it's the regular season, right? And the way that the AFL finals work out is that basically you want to finish top 4. That's what you want. You want to finish top 4 because if you finish top 4, you get 2 chances in the finals, as opposed to if you finish between 5th and 8th, you only get the 1 chance, and you've got to win 4 games in a row to win the premiership or the championship, I suppose. Anyway, so 4 weeks ago, Collingwood are sitting pretty on top of the ladder, well out in front, had already locked in their spot in the top 4. And had basically almost locked in their spot as the number 1 seed, I suppose, going into finals. And we played Hawthorn, who were third last and did actually finish the season third last. And going into that game, I was at the MCG, Melbourne Cricket Ground, which is our home ground. Going into the game, we were, I think, about a 40-point favourite. So in NBA terms, I like to think that the scoring of AFL is the value of about double the NBA, in my opinion. So if you're a 40-point favourite in the AFL, then I think you're probably about a 20-point favourite in the NBA. And so we came out and we were horrendous. This is the top team, clearly the top team, against the third worst team, and it was horrific. And you could tell straight away that the team wasn't quite on. It's like an intangible thing. It's just stuff happens within the course of the game where you're like, if they were a little bit locked in here, that doesn't happen, right? And it can be a raft of things, but you can just tell as a fan, analysing the game that, hey, we aren't quite on today, and that can happen in every sport at every level around the world. And psychologically, you can not have the full motivation, which then transfers into what you do on the field or on the court, wherever it may be, where you're not quite at your best. And in professional sport, anyone can really beat you if they're having a great day and you're having a bad day, right? And I think the margins are a little bit less than what you may think. And so, from an American perspective, you can look at the roster and think, geez, look at the raft of NBA, all-star level talent that we have at our disposal here. And then look at Lithuania And, you from an NBA perspective, Jonas Valanciunas is the main guy, who's a solid role player really in the NBA, but nothing too much more than that. And then a lot of their other guys just play in Europe, right, or elsewhere around the world. And so you can look at that and think, geez, we should beat them easily. And you should. You really should. But I think to discredit Lithuania or any other professional team for that matter in such a way is bordering on very dangerous. And I'm not saying that America did that. In fact, the fact they were able to come back into the game and win, lose by only 6 points, I think, there's got to be credit given there. And I don't think this was a case of being totally checked out mentally, but I also do think that you can't point to Lithuania beginning 9 for 9 from 3-point range and just say, well, we couldn't have done anything about that. I mean, there's always something you could have done. And so clearly, I think America started the game clearly not as they would have liked, but that probably emanated from a different psychological standpoint, knowing they'd already qualified for the quarterfinals. And so it always interests me, the kind of psychology of sport, the different motivations, because yes, you're supposed to be professional athletes, you're supposed to be fully motivated, invested in every single game you play, but the reality is that's not what happens. And players and athletes and even coaches' motivation levels, go up and down, depending on what the game really means to them. And that's just, as fans, that's not great. We'd like to see, the athletes go out every single time and try and perform at their best. But I know, going back to Collingwood, I know for the last month where, as I said, the top 4 spot's been locked in, we did end up finishing top of the ladder after the home and away season. But I know for the last month or so, it's really more been about, can we preserve injuries here and not have players get injured, which unfortunately we have, and to some of our best players too. But it's been more about that rather than the actual win-loss result of it. And so when you get to that kind of stage of a season where you're really looking about preserving and getting fully healthy and available for the important time of the season, rather than the actual win-loss result, then you open yourself up to shock defeats. And, that Collingwood game against Hawthorn that I go back to, we were 40-point favourites. We lost the game by 40. So not only did we lose the game, but we actually lost the game by what I would say the equivalent NBA value is about 20 points, which is a fair blowout, really. So, again, it just goes to show you that in professional sport, you can't disrespect any opponent that you come up against. And again, not to say that America disrespected Lithuania, but you can't tell me that they could have done more in that first quarter to kind of overcome the 3-point shooting that Lithuania were putting on them, and the kind of 31-12 start that Lithuania got out to, which was the big difference in the end, because obviously the US got back into it, but that 19-point deficit was just too much to overcome, and Lithuania steadied. Because from that perspective, when you're down 19 points, you pretty much have to play perfect basketball from there to get back into the game and win it. And to the US's credit, they did that to a degree, but doing it for 3 quarters is a difficult thing to do for any team, let alone even an American team with as much talent as they've got. So looking forward to the final stages of the World Cup here. I still think Team USA will win and probably win comfortably, and I do think that this can turn out to be a positive result for them, just in terms of being a wake-up call, getting their minds back on the job, and now preparing for Italy in the quarterfinals. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for listening if you've made it to this end of the episode. I'll have another episode here in a couple of days, looking more at a Warrior perspective around things. Obviously, at the moment, not too much going on from a Golden State perspective in terms of off-court news or anything like that. So we'll keep it rolling here over the next 6 weeks or so. Looking forward to training camp beginning and pre-season, and delivering you guys some more news and analysis on the Golden State Warriors. In the meantime, please subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Give us a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can follow me, of course, at POC252, POK252 on Twitter. Until next episode.